What if I told you the first pet came before farms or cities? Not as an invention, but rather a simple deal between hungry hunters and curious wolves who learned that sharing a fire was safer than facing the night alone. This bond started in small moments, through tossed scraps of food and cautious looks from the shadows. Little by little, the two species learned they could trade fear for trust, and both walk away stronger. A bark could warn of danger, and a warm body by the door was a comfort people didn't want to lose. But historians say this didn't happen all at once. It was a very slow process. If you follow that path from Ice Age fires to today's living rooms, the question when first pets came doesn't have a simple answer. It's a chain of moments where people and animals kept trading need, care, and meaning in the same story. Archaeologists found something strange near Bonn, Germany. In a grave from 14,000 years ago, a man, a woman, and a young dog were buried together, like a small family choosing to face the afterlife side by side. The dog's bones show it had a severe disease, likely distemper, and yet it survived long enough to relapse. That means someone nursed a sick non-working puppy for weeks, just because they loved the small life beside them. Even earlier, so-called almost dogs show up in Ice Age caves in Europe and Asia. Their skulls look half wolf, half dog, proof that the partnership was still forming and the names weren't settled yet. Debate over those bones is what a continuum looks like when you try to nail it down, because origins rarely sit neatly on a single line and real change usually arrives in overlapping waves. By the end of the last Ice Age, people and these animals shared space, dangers, and sometimes even graves. About 12,000 years ago, in the Jordan Valley, a person from the Natufian culture was buried with a puppy under their hand. It shows the animal mattered for more than food, work, or warning barks in the night. Across the ocean, in the Illinois River Valley, archaeologists found dog burials about 10,000 years old at the Coster and Stillwell 2 sites. These dogs were buried in their own graves, not thrown out with trash. Someone took the time to dig, place the body, and cover it with care. That shows a line between using an animal and having a real bond with it. These graves don't prove the modern idea of a pet, but they do show that even long ago, people didn't just use animals, they also loved them. Affection and function have been tied together since the start. Cats joined people in a different way. They followed mice into the first grain stores in the Near East. The walls, the grain, and the mouse trails made the perfect path for quiet paws. Living close to people gave cats steady hunting, safe shelter, and finally a warm doorway where a cat could sit and watch the same way people watch the horizon. On the island of Cyprus, at Shilurokambos, a 9,500-year-old grave holds a human and a cat buried together with shells and fine stones. Genetics show our house cats came from Near Eastern wildcats. But burials like this show when simple usefulness turned into care, and care turned into memory. What started as rodent control became friendship, and friendship led to grief, the kind that makes someone bury a small body with love. The Egyptians kept animals like cats and dogs, not only for companionship, but for religious reasons, often revering animals as symbols of deity that moved between daily life and sacred space without losing either role. Bastet, the cat goddess, watched over homes, while Anubis, with the head of a jackal, guarded the dead. Dog collars inscribed with names like Brave One or North Wind show that dogs were seen as individuals, not just guard animals. Some collars were fancy leather, even buried with their wealthy owners. A princess cat named Tamu was given a carved coffin and funeral rites, the kind of respect you give family, not a pest catcher or household tool. On Egypt's Red Sea coast, at Berenike, a Roman-era cemetery holds hundreds of pets, mostly cats, but also dogs and monkeys. Many were laid as if sleeping, some wore beaded collars, and others had bones showing healed injuries that proved they were cared for over time. In Greek healing sanctuaries of Asclepius, the sick slept within sacred courtyards, told their dreams to priests, and sometimes even let temple dogs lick wounds as part of the cure. That's because comfort and hope were often the only medicine when nothing else was available. In Zoroastrian funerals, a ritual called Sagdid brought a dog to look at the body. The dog was a guardian against evil and a witness at the doorway between life and death. People trusted dogs in moments of fear and duty. These weren't pets the way we think of them today, but they show how work, faith, and affection all blended together, just like they still do with therapy animals that calm nerves and steady hearts. Greek and Roman art and writing show how much people cared for their animals. Gravestones show children holding small dogs and birds. Some poems talk about the sadness of losing a sparrow, the same way a family mourns a pet today. One carved stone from the classical period shows a girl reaching for her dove. It's a simple moment of care that anyone in any time would recognize. Wealthy Romans often kept tiny lapdogs. They were partly for show, but they were also real companions. When people carve animals into stone or write about them in poems, it means those animals mattered. You don't honor something that way unless you truly loved it. A famous moment comes from Homer's The Odyssey. After 20 years away, Odysseus returns to Ithaca in disguise, and the only one to recognize him is his old dog, Argos. He had spent 10 years at the Trojan War, and 10 more trying to get home. To avoid the suitors who had taken over his palace, he dressed as a beggar. Argos, now old, sick and abandoned, was lying on a pile of filth outside the gates, but the moment he saw Odysseus, he wagged his tail and dropped his ears in recognition. In Imperial China, the Pekingese dog was bred as a palace pet. It was so small it could be carried inside a sleeve. These dogs were highly valued, given guards, rules of care, and a place in royal stories. Europe later fell in love with small dogs too, but also brought birds and fish into the home. Canaries filled the kitchens with song, turning mornings into little concerts for families. In China's Song dynasty, people bred goldfish for beauty and meaning. They stopped being food and became bright, moving decorations that brought peace to a room. In both rich courts and simple homes, pets showed people's taste, told something about who they were, and made their living spaces feel alive. In medieval Europe, people argued about whether keeping pets was right or wrong. A nun who spoiled small dogs might be called silly, but recluses were still allowed to keep a cat for catching mice and for company in a lonely cell. By the Renaissance, paintings and household records show that lapdogs were common in noble homes. Their colors and decorations showed both love and status, something everyone could see. Were these animals just pets or symbols? Many think they were both. People have never fully separated love from meaning in the animals they live with. The rules and judgments of the time sit next to the simple record of care. Together they show what people really did when no one was watching. The modern idea of a pet, named, vaccinated, photographed, and fitted for a harness, grew fast in the 1800s. Cities, rising incomes, and new ideas about kindness all helped turn animals into household members in a public, organized way. In 1859, the city of Newcastle held a dog show for pointers and setters. Many say it was the first modern dog show. By 1873, the Kennel Club was formed to register dogs and set rules for a hobby that quickly spread into homes and newspapers. Feeding pets also changed. In the 1860s, companies started selling dog cakes. By the early 1900s, canned and branded pet food was common. What once was just table scraps became a daily ritual, complete with labels and a spot in the family budget. What had taken thousands of years to grow by the fire changed in just a few decades into a marketplace, a hobby, and a system of shelters and laws that treated animals as family with names and needs. At first, animals worked for us. They guarded our homes, kept out pests, pulled sleds, and helped us survive. That was reason enough to let them into human spaces and give them food by the door. Religion later gave them other roles. Dogs were used in healing temples and funerals. In courts and cities, small animals became signs of status and fashion, showing something about their owners. Anthropologists also find that small societies often raised wild young animals just because someone wanted to care for them. That suggests the urge to treat animals as companions is deeply human, not just a modern habit. Once a bond like that begins, it usually lasts. Caring leads to recognition, recognition leads to names, and names make grief possible. That's why we keep finding old collars, pet graves, and inscriptions left by people long ago who didn't want to forget their animals. So, who really owned the first pet? Well, if a pet means an animal kept for company, then the sick dog from Bonneober Castle is an early example. It was nursed through illness and later buried with people. The Natufian grave with a hand resting on a puppy says the same thing. If a pet means an animal buried with care, then the early American dog graves and the Cypriot grave with a cat also count. They show love for the individual, not just use for work. But if first means a clear name and date, we don't really have one. The bond between people and animals is older than writing, older than pottery, and older than the stories we tell about beginnings. The first pet owner might have been a hunter warming a cold puppy by the fire, a farmer's child drawing a cat close to the hearth, or a sailor burying a kitten with beads on its collar in a quiet port. People have always made space for animals. Pets show how our ideas about work, love, faith, and home have changed. Use and affection often mix together, and they rarely separate. Look back and you'll see the signs: a buried puppy, a dog's collar with a name, a girl's dove carved on a gravestone, a tiny lapdog carried in a sleeve, a canary singing in a kitchen, and a goldfish swimming under a paper fan. All tell the same story in their own way. The question isn't whether pets existed long ago. The question is why we often confuse love with luxury or ritual with usefulness, when the evidence shows people have cared for animals whenever they could. That's why the oldest scenes are still easy to understand. A hand resting on fur in a grave needs no explanation. Even after 14,000 years, it is still clear it was a final touch given to a friend.